clerk will read out the names.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Parliaments and Governance. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join us here on the program. I'm Wuyi Agmofwegwe and we're in Benin City, Nigeria. This week on the program, we want to take a look at the issue of corruption, or if you like, the fight against corruption. But in particular, we want to look at some particular or some very, very remarkable efforts being made to ensure that the fight against corruption is properly governized, and the executive has done and continues to do a whole lot on that front, even though in some cases some persons have said there are question marks hanging over these initiatives. One of them being the most recent is the Proceeds of Crime Bill, an executive bill that is, which the executive obviously has sent to the Senate to say, let's take a look at this because the executive says it believes it will help to address the issues around management of recovered assets in the fight against graft in this country. Recall that in recent times, one of the issues we've had is what happens to recoveries. I mean, when the EFCC, for example, or any other anti-corruption agency makes recoveries, what do they do with, for example, the funds and then the assets, maybe real estate and maybe automobile, for example? These have been questions that many Nigerians have been asking. Hopefully, by way of addressing this particular concern, the federal government had to introduce this executive bill. But then again, some persons are already beginning to see some holes, peak holes in this particular piece of hopefully legislation that the executive is pushing. First, there's the question of whether or not it will see the light of day, and then second, where it becomes a law, for example. Do we have the courage, do we have the will going forward to be able to implement all of the items in this particular initiative? Those are the issues we want to look at on the program for you this week. My guest will help us shed light on these and many other issues as far as the fight against graft in Nigeria is concerned. Stay with me. I'm joined by Honorable Fred Uyigwe. He's a politician and an economist. We've been here together a few times to talk about issues around corruption, but for this week, we want to particularly look at recovery and then management of assets by anti-graft agencies in Nigeria. Fred, it's always a pleasure to have you join us on our program.
Thank you for having me on this program.
I want us to begin to first look at, fight against corruption for some people has become cliche, because they feel, well, we've been hearing that for about 2 decades, because even right from the first tenure of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, we had already started hearing about the fight against corruption. How well are we doing with that fight overall in your candid assessment?
I must say that corruption in the country has gone progressively worse from administration to administration. And then astronomically so, since the inception of the present dispensation of democracy, or dispensation of a governmental system, and which is quite discouraging and disappointing. To go into the proposed bill specifically, that is the Proceeds of Crime Recovery Bill.
Yes.
Okay. It seeks, among other things, the powers to manage the recovered bills. And I found that very funny. Corruption already is criminalized. It's in the criminal code. What is corruption? Corruption is appropriating that which belongs to another entity to oneself. Okay? Or violating the practices that are laid down as corruption, deliberately violating those practices. Like in appointments, you can be corrupt just by how you appoint and whom you appoint. But specifically what we are talking about, it's in the cash and goods recovered from those who have looted public treasuries.
Right.
If people have done, and people do that, and it's not if people have done that, who have done that over the years. But the ones that are sensational are the ones that are large, huge. So that is what everybody knows about and everybody seems to talk about.
Yeah.
But corruption permeates the system from the top to the bottom. And we cannot hope to mitigate corruption unless we begin to revise how we combat corruption. What the industry, what the proposed bill seeks to do is to answer the question of what happens after corruption.
Right.
Okay? Is the post effect of corruption that the bill proposes to address. What was most disappointing in the presentation of the proposal bill is that nothing was said about what has been accomplished in mitigating corruption. What measures have been put in place to mitigate corruption? What the corruption level or index was before this government came into power?
Right.
What is the present index? And going forward, what are the measures that they intend to put in place to improve that index? So you need to have all of that. Going before the National Assembly or the Senate to present a bill with sweeping statements like it will help in accounting for the bill. How will it help in accounting for the bill? For the recoveries. How will it help in accounting for the recoveries?
You think that statement was bogus?
It's bogus. Because what did you used to do that you are now changing that will make it more accountable? Okay. Nigerians have asked over time as to how much has been so far recovered, especially since this administration. Nigerians don't have a figure because the administration has not presented a figure.
Why is that so difficult? Does it speak to the volume of recovery that has been recorded, or is it a matter of, the culture of not being accountable that we've always had in this country?
It is the culture of not being accountable. What are you talking about, the volume? Office of Budget and Statistics is able to collate the activities of the entire economy and to give you a sense of what the GDP is, gross domestic product is.
Which is
humongous.
Exactly, more composite.
So this is just a teeny tiny portion of all of that. This is a question of addition. What has been recovered from different persons, from different entities, from different quarters? Addition. There's nothing complex about it at all. So it is quite disappointing that, and discouraging too, that the government has not given us a template for moving us from where we are to where we're going.
There's something I want to ask you before we go on a break.
Okay.
I want to ask you something about the mindset and the perception as far as corruption is concerned.
Yes.
Every time you talk about corruption, especially where it has to do with government officials and overall people who are, as it were, politically exposed,
Right.
it will appear our minds revolve basically around money. So when you say somebody is corrupt, for example, the first impression you get off the top of your head is they probably have stolen money, they have misappropriated money. But we've also seen people who have abused privileges, abused their offices. How come we cannot expand our minds enough to also, as it were, incorporate all of these elements into our overall perception of corruption and then deal with these issues along the same line?
To start with, the public servant, politicians and civil servants combined, have this feeling of self-entitlement
In Nigeria?
in Nigeria, that what belongs to the government, what they receive to be custodians of, first belongs to them to take as they want. And so where they believe they can tweak the authority to so appropriate to themselves, they will tweak it. And then go ahead, appropriate more than is reasonable out of global best practices to themselves, as we saw in the case of the NDDC investigative
Panel?
legislative investigative panel.
Yeah.
We saw that.
Yeah.
And we saw what the professor had to say. He said that they needed to satisfy themselves first. And they needed, and then they appropriated 1.3 billion naira to themselves.
What was that for? Esta code?
He said the 1.3 billion naira was for the COVID COVID relief. That
For members of staff of
for
the
members
NDDC.
of staff of NDDC. I found that very strange and funny that a professor would think in that light. Okay, but that is the general mindset of the public servant.
Okay.
So they want to take what they believe they need, all they believe they want, all they believe they need to save for themselves, to take care of them for several years down the line, and then leave the residue, which is residual revenue, for development of public projects or for the service of public projects. It ought not to be so and should not be so. So ideally, what we should have, which we don't have, are checks and balances within the systems to compel honesty and integrity.
I'll tell you what it takes. Those checks and balances within the system are the things we'll talk about next. But again, that will be after we've gone on this break. We're going on a quick break now. When we'll come back, we'll look at those checks and balances that Fred has talked about, for example, look at them in detail. And then going forward, this proposal, this proposed proceeds of crime bill, which is an executive bill, what the implication will be as far as the fight against corruption in Nigeria is concerned. Stay with me. Thank you for staying with us on the program. So let's take a look at a few other issues regarding this very topical discussion. Look at corruption today, for example, in Nigeria. It's both in public institutions and private organizations. Have we shown signs? Do we have evidence that, as a government and as a people, we're ready to fight corruption to a standstill beyond initiatives like the proceeds of crime bill?
Okay, let me mention this. My discipline was in purchasing and materials management.
Okay.
So I find it extremely disappointing when I read the requirements of the public procurement agency's regulations. Nigerians are all aware that there are only few independent contractors left in Nigeria. The civil servants and the politicians are the government contractors. So every contract coming out of the government, they appropriate to themselves. And that lends itself to high corruption. Okay? That is because the tenders process is weak and porous.
Has it always been that way? It was better at the point, wasn't it?
It was better at a point. Because it was better when, right after independence, we had people who had understudied and underserved under the colonial masters.
The
And so
British.
that was their culture. But all that began to change. But let's even begin to wrap our minds around the magnitude of corruption. Okay? Abacha's recovered loot so far, cumulatively, is $4.3 billion. That's almost 2 trillion naira. I did the math before coming here. Okay? 1.978 trillion naira by today's exchange rate. That's huge. That's by one man in the space of 5 years. Then think about that. Expand your imagination to all the politicians over the years and all the civil servants at all the levels over the years. I would think we'll be very conservative to think that over 100 trillion naira has been stolen from the coffers of government.
Is that to put it mildly?
Yes, that is to put it mildly. In the past 60 years, okay, like I said earlier, the ones we are aware of are the ones that are huge enough, or the ones that accidentally get exposed. But I would say more than 95%, if not 99%, of corrupt practices in Nigeria go unnoticed and go undetected, and of course go unprosecuted. And of the ones that get noticed, get detected, how many of them are successfully prosecuted? So these are questions we have to wrap around.
There's the issue of plea bargaining, for example. Have you ever given a thought to the idea of plea bargaining and how it probably has helped in the fight against corruption?
I think that is a cop-out from taking responsibility to recover what is yours.
Okay.
It's like an armed robber that comes to your house. He comes to take away some of your properties. And then you call him back and you beg him to return some of it so that he can keep some, so that you can have some back. I don't see anybody that does that.
So that was a mistake for us.
It's a mistake to even think about it. If anybody has stolen that which belongs to him, which does not belong to him, the person should be apprehended and prosecuted. It's a standard norm worldwide. It's so in our laws.
Yeah.
Why are we now going to accommodate plea bargaining? If the plea bargaining is to mitigate, which is what is done in the US in the first place, if it's to mitigate the punishment for cooperating with the agencies or with the government in returning the loot voluntarily, or without much expense in the prosecution and in the recovery, that is understandable. But if it's for those who have looted to also keep a part of the proceeds of what they have looted, that is unacceptable.
Let's talk about the whistleblower policy, which a lot of Nigerians said came at the right time, was a step in the right direction. But today we have heard little or nothing about it. Where are we with that policy?
The legislature killed that. Because as you and I know, to the last one I would say they are all corrupt.
How did they kill that?
Apologies. Because they did not give authority, they did not give powers to that initiative.
But they had their reasons, didn't they?
What were the reasons? That some innocent people might be apprehended. It happens in every society.
I guess they had concerns about possible mischief. People who probably would just want to give a dog a bad name to hang it, and a few other possibilities.
Everybody can cite that as an excuse, to not do one thing or another. That somebody could be mischievous. Okay, you say, okay, the armed robber says, well, it is being mischievous to have been accused of armed robbery by those who are accusing him. No, we have agencies, particularly the police system, that is empowered to investigate all cases of corruption or crimes. Okay? So in the case of mischief, what happens? There's libel, there's defamation of character, there's, you know, those are remedies for whomever it is that suffers any kind of mischief from anybody.
Right.
And there should be, and I think there is, restitution provisions against such people who may engage in mischiefs. So it's not an excusable reason.
Okay, as we wrap up now, I just wanted to talk about the issue of laws, because you mentioned that in passing. As it stands today, can we confidently beat our chest and say Nigeria has got enough laws to prosecute cases of corruption?
There is always something that has not been done. Okay, the best way to tackle this is to take a look, to review. You can always constitute a body, panel, to review corruption practices and why they have failed, and corruption control systems,
Right.
and why they have failed, and what more should be done. It's like the restructuring that Nigeria talks about very often. Okay, we have a system that we have tried to manage and have tweaked again and again and again, restructured again and again and again since 1960. First the 3 regions government, then the 4 regions government, then the 12 states, the 19 states, the 21 states, 28 states, and now 36 states. We have been changing. Because we thought perhaps in creating these new states, in creating additional states, then we'll have stability. But we are not having that. We still don't have it. Perhaps there are things that we have not looked at. Okay? So it's the same thing with corruption.
That's regarding the laws on corruption.
Yes. So it's the same thing with corruption. You look at corruption, you look at the templates, you look at the practices of corruption and say what systems can be put in place to mitigate it. And then you must have measurement parameters to determine whether
some sort of key performance indicators.
Yes, performance indicators to make sure that yes, you are actually making progress. You are reducing it. You must have preventive measures, and you must have elimination measures to completely eliminate it. And it's possible. Look, the multinational corporations of the world are leading corporations only because especially the industry leaders, are only so because they have systems in place that compels honesty and integrity. And that too is what we must have in place.
As a country to be able to fight corruption, which means in the final analysis, no matter what executive bills we introduce, which overall may not be bad ideas, we must have the requisite systems and structures in place to be able to drive the change we want to see as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. I've spent the last 23 minutes talking with Honorable Fred Uigwe, economist and politician. We're so grateful for the time you spent with us.
Yes, I just want to add one thing here. I don't believe there's a business school anywhere in the world that doesn't teach that you do not structure systems on the goodwill and honesty of those to operate it. So, and the Bible also tells us that we should trust no one. Okay, so you cannot base a system based on trust and the goodwill.
So no room for assumptions.
No room for.
So let's be proactive.
You have to have a system that compels it.
So again, the emphasis apparently is on systems and structures. Once again, we're grateful for this Sunday spent.
Thank you for having
with us today. So this is where we're leaving it on the program for this week. We're back here next week with another edition of the program. Until then, our coverage on ITV continues. I'm Wihi Agmofwebe. Enjoy the rest of your evening.